James Madison High School in Brooklyn, New York was a respected institution. Among its faculty was 34-year-old English teacher LaToya Harris, known for her sharp intellect and no-nonsense approach. She was a commanding presence in the classroom, respected and feared by students. Outside school, however, her life was far different. LaToya's personal life was not as seamless as her professional career. She lived in a modest brownstone in a quiet neighborhood, far removed from the bustling streets of Brooklyn. Her home life was often lonely, as her husband Marcus, a long-haul truck driver, was frequently away on extended trips. Their marriage had started full of love and passion, but over the years it had become distant and cold. The absence of Marcus, both physically and emotionally, left LaToya feeling isolated and unfulfilled. She began to feel trapped in a life that no longer sparked joy or excitement, which created a deep sense of dissatisfaction. It was during one of Marcus's long trips that LaToya first noticed Jamal Thompson, a 17-year-old senior at James Madison High School. Jamal was a popular student, well known for his athleticism and natural charisma. He was a star on the basketball team, tall, handsome, and with a smile that could light up any room. Despite his outward confidence, Jamal was struggling academically, his grades were slipping, and he was in danger of not graduating. As a teacher who genuinely cared about her students, LaToya decided to offer her help. She approached Jamal with the idea of tutoring him after school, hoping to help him improve his grades and avoid jeopardizing his future. LaToya had always been professional in her role as a teacher, but something about Jamal Thompson began to stir feelings in her that she had long suppressed. At first, their interactions were entirely focused on his academic struggles. Jamal was a star on the basketball team, athletic and confident, but his grades were slipping and he was at risk of not graduating. LaToya, ever the dedicated educator, decided to take on the challenge of helping him. During their study sessions, she couldn't help but notice his easy smile and the way he seemed to hang on her every word. Jamal, for his part, was drawn to her maturity, intelligence, and the way she commanded the classroom. Unlike many of his peers, he respected her, and their relationship quickly blossomed from teacher-student into something more. He began to linger after class, seeking extra help on assignments, but there was an unspoken tension between them now. Jamal would occasionally brush against her arm or meet her gaze in ways that made LaToya's heart race. Despite knowing how inappropriate it was, she found herself feeling increasingly drawn to him. The physical and emotional chemistry between them was undeniable. The attraction was something that LaToya could not ignore, even as she tried to push it aside. The more she spent time with Jamal, the more she began to crave his company, and the lines between their professional relationship and something more personal started to blur. While LaToya was becoming entangled with Jamal, another student, Rashad Williams, began to show increasing interest in her. Rashad, a 16-year-old football player with a reputation for being confident and charismatic, had admired LaToya for some time. His flirtations were subtle at first, but he began staying after class, seeking her attention with questions about assignments he didn't really need help with. At first, LaToya brushed it off. Rashad's charm, though undeniable, was something she tried to resist, as she had started developing a bond with Jamal, but Rashad's persistence eventually wore her down. He was different from Jamal, bolder, more upfront with his feelings. His attention made LaToya feel special, desired and valued in a way she hadn't felt in years. It was an irresistible mix of youthful energy and raw physical attraction. One day, after a particularly intense tutoring session with Jamal, Rashad cornered her in the hallway. He confessed how he had admired her from afar and wanted to take their relationship beyond the classroom. LaToya hesitated at first, but the emotional void in her life, especially with her husband Marcus often away, pushed her to make an uncharacteristic decision. She agreed to a secret rendezvous with Rashad, marking the beginning of their passionate and reckless affair. It was everything that her marriage wasn't: exciting, fiery, and forbidden. LaToya's affair with Rashad was passionate but reckless. He was a different type of lover than Jamal. His attention was bold, his actions impulsive. The affair was not born of deep emotional connection, but rather a need to escape from the routine of her staid life. LaToya found herself sneaking around, meeting Rashad in secret places, sometimes in her car, sometimes in her classroom after hours. Every stolen moment felt like a desperate rush rush of adrenaline, something she hadn't felt in years, but as thrilling as the affair was, it was also dangerous. Latoya knew what she was doing was wrong, but the attention and physical satisfaction Rashad provided her with overshadowed any guilt she may have felt. The affair was reckless not just in terms of the physical encounters, but also in how it placed her job, reputation, and marriage at risk. Rashad was not content with just their private meetings. He began to demand more from Latoya, pushing for them to go public with their relationship. He felt entitled to her, and his possessiveness started to show. Latoya's involvement with Rashad was complicated enough, but her life became even more tangled when she became involved with Andre Mitchell. Andre was an 18-year-old senior, a quiet, introspective student who had been in her English class for 2 years. Unlike Jamal and Rashad, Andre was not as openly flirtatious or bold in his advances. Instead, he admired Latoya from a distance, frequently staying after class to discuss literature and philosophy. Latoya was initially drawn to his intellectual curiosity and the depth of their conversations. Unlike the brash and intense energy of Jamal and Rashad, Andre's calm demeanor and thoughtful nature offered Latoya a sense of peace. Their conversations delved into topics that fascinated her: art, life, and the complexity of human emotions. She felt understood by Andre in a way that was entirely different from the physical and emotional fulfillment she had found with Rashad and Jamal. Though their relationship was more about emotional connection than physical attraction, the lines began to blur once again. One evening, after an impassioned discussion about a book they had both read, Andre leaned in for a kiss. This kiss was gentle, filled with the promise of something deeper. Latoya gave in to her emotions, and their affair blossomed into something both intellectually and emotionally fulfilling. Yet, as she became closer to Andre, she found herself even more entangled in a web of deceit. The affair with Andre was the most emotionally complex for Latoya. She wasn't just looking for physical satisfaction, she sought solace and emotional connection that her marriage could no longer provide. Andre was attentive and kind, qualities that Latoya had craved for years. Unlike Rashad, who was driven by lust, or Jamal, whose affections were complicated by their age difference, Andre offered Latoya an intellectual escape. They spent long hours talking, discussing everything from philosophy to their deepest fears. Andre was a listener, offering Latoya the attention and understanding she had not received from her husband. Over time, she found herself falling for him in a way she hadn't anticipated. She confided in him about her troubled marriage and how distant her husband had become. Andre, who had always been wise beyond his years, listened intently, offering words of comfort and empathy. This emotional connection, however, only deepened Latoya's internal conflict. She loved the affection Jamal provided, the excitement Rashad gave her, but it was Andre who made her feel truly seen and understood. Latoya's life had become a precarious balancing act, and she was beginning to feel the weight of her decisions. The strain of juggling 3 secret affairs, each with its own demands, emotions, and complications, was beginning to take its toll on her. At first, she had convinced herself that she could keep everything under control, but as the days passed, the effort of managing these relationships while maintaining her marriage, her professional image, and her responsibilities as a teacher was overwhelming. With Jamal, the relationship was initially exciting, but started to feel more like a secret to be kept at all costs. They shared passionate moments, but his increasing dependence on her for emotional support started to feel burdensome. Rashad, with his impulsive nature, demanded attention at unpredictable times, adding stress to her already complicated life. He didn't care for subtlety or delays and insisted on meeting at odd hours, sending flirtatious texts that were increasingly inappropriate for a teacher-student relationship. Andre, the more emotionally intelligent of the three, seemed to sense when she was emotionally distant and pushed for deeper connections, which only added another layer of complexity. She began to lie to him more frequently, claiming she was busy with work or personal matters when, in reality, she was trying to keep the other relationships afloat. The constant switching between identities, the passionate lover with Jamal, the fiery and reckless partner with Rashad, and the intellectual companion with Andre left Latoya emotionally drained. She began to make small mistakes, forgetting where she had left her phone, or worse, mixing up texts and messages from the boys. Her concentration at work slipped, and she found herself forgetting lesson plans or, on occasion, arriving late to class. There were moments when she felt that all the lies were closing in around her, but she couldn't stop. Each affair offered something different, something she felt she lacked in her own life, and each affair, despite the strain, made her feel alive in ways her marriage no longer did. As Latoya became more consumed by her affairs, the boys began to sense that something wasn't right. It started with small observations. Jamal noticed how distracted she had become during their tutoring sessions, her gaze often distant as if she were thinking of something else. Rashad, who had never been the most patient, grew more frustrated with Latoya's evasions. He began to pick up on subtle clues, missed text messages, inconsistent answers to his questions about her whereabouts, and the fact that she was no longer as responsive as before. Andre, the quietest of the three, was the first to truly voice his suspicions. He had noticed the shifts in Latoya's behavior long before the others. At first, he dismissed it, thinking it was just his imagination, but the more he observed, the more he realized that Latoya was hiding something from him. He became more withdrawn in their meetings, pushing for answers in their conversations. At times, Latoya would give him vague responses, brushing off his concerns, but Andre had begun to distrust her in ways he had never felt before. It wasn't just her physical absence that bothered them, it was the emotional withdrawal. Latoya, once so passionate and present, was no longer the same woman they had initially been drawn to, and while none of the boys could prove their suspicions, the tension was palpable. They all began to question whether Latoya was truly devoted to any of them, or if she was simply playing them for her own pleasure. As each of them faced their own feelings of frustration, the dynamics among them shifted, their curiosity turned into resentment, and the underlying tension became unbearable. The inevitable moment of truth came when Jamal, feeling a mixture of jealousy and betrayal, decided to confront Latoya. He had reached his breaking point. He had noticed that Latoya had been slipping away from him, their time together growing shorter and more mechanical. One day after school, Jamal waited for Latoya in the parking lot, determination written on his face. "Latoya!" he called as she walked toward her car. She froze at the sound of his voice. "Are you seeing someone else?" he asked, his voice tight with frustration. Latoya hesitated. Her heart raced. She had prepared herself for this moment, but wasn't sure how to handle it. She tried to deflect his question, offering excuses for her behavior, but Jamal wasn't having it. He pressed her harder, demanding answers. "I've been giving you everything, but you've been distant. What's going on?" Before Latoya could respond, Rashad appeared, having overheard the argument. His expression was a mix of anger and confusion, and it didn't take long before the two boys began shouting at each other. Rashad, feeling slighted and furious over Latoya's behavior, accused Jamal of not understanding her, while Jamal shot back, accusing Rashad of being too selfish and careless in his approach. Latoya tried to intervene, but the situation quickly escalated. She could see the anger in both of their eyes, and for a moment she felt completely out of control. The emotional weight of the situation was crushing, and she began to panic. Her attempts to calm them down only seemed to make things worse, and then Andre showed up. He had been watching from a distance, knowing something was wrong, but now, seeing the confrontation, he knew things had gone too far. The confrontation had reached a boiling point. What had begun as an emotional showdown between the boys, each feeling deceived, betrayed, and confused by Latoya's actions, exploded into physical violence. Jamal, his patience and anger reaching their limits, shoved Rashad hard. The force sent Rashad stumbling backward, and the shove ignited the tension that had been building for weeks. Rashad, with his usual impulsive nature, retaliated almost instantly, throwing a punch at Jamal's face. The impact of the punch connected, sending Jamal reeling. His body twisted from the force of the blow, but his own anger pushed him to retaliate. The two boys collided like storms, fists flying. At first it was a chaotic mess of punches and shoves, but soon enough they were wrestling on the ground, grappling fiercely, each one trying to dominate the other. The parking lot was filled with shouts of anger and frustration. Latoya stood frozen, heart pounding as the fight broke out before her eyes. She attempted to pull them apart, her voice trembling as she pleaded with both boys to stop. "Stop, please stop," she shouted, reaching for both of them, but neither seemed to hear her. Their emotions, inflamed by betrayal and confusion, had completely overtaken their judgment. Andre, who had been standing off to the side, stunned by the rapid escalation, quickly made a move. At first he hesitated, uncertain about how to de-escalate the situation, but when the fight seemed to intensify, he grabbed a nearby metal pipe from a construction site in a last-ditch effort to break them apart. His intentions were good, to stop the fight, but in the chaos, he misjudged the moment. In an attempt to pull Jamal off Rashad, Andre swung the pipe, but instead of merely tapping Jamal on the back to get his attention, the pipe hit Jamal with full force. The blow was unexpected and jarring, causing Jamal to stumble forward, momentarily dazed. Latoya screamed in horror at what she had just witnessed. The sound of the metal pipe striking Jamal echoed in the parking lot, and for a split second, everything went still. Jamal hit the ground hard, groaning from the pain, while Rashad and Andre stood frozen, realizing what had just happened. Latoya rushed to Jamal's side, checking him for injuries, panic rising in her chest. The boys had now caused more than just a physical altercation. The emotional and moral consequences had exploded in the most devastating way possible. The consequences were swift and harsh. The sounds of the fight and Latoya's cries of panic had alerted bystanders, and soon enough, sirens were heard in the distance. Within minutes, police cars and ambulances arrived at the scene, and the once empty parking lot became a chaotic scene of flashing lights and law enforcement personnel. Jamal, who had sustained a blow to the head, was immediately examined by paramedics. His injuries, though not life-threatening, were significant. He had suffered a concussion, and there was concern over the impact on his long-term health, especially given his athletic future. The paramedics rushed him to the hospital, where his condition would remain under close observation for the next few hours. Rashad and Andre were both detained by the police. The authorities needed to understand the full extent of the altercation, and both boys were taken into custody for questioning. Rashad's frustration was evident as he shouted accusations at Andre for hitting Jamal with the pipe. Andre, equally angry, responded defensively, but neither could escape the harsh reality of the situation. The police began to gather evidence and witness statements, and the escalating nature of the fight, along with Latoya's involvement, quickly became the focus of their investigation. Latoya, though not directly involved in the physical violence, was nonetheless seen as a key figure in the events that led up to the fight. The police questioned her extensively about the nature of her relationships with the boys, as well as the lead-up to the altercation. Her answers were evasive, and as the questions grew more pointed, she began to realize the full weight of her actions. The officers hinted at the possibility of charges being brought against her, though they were careful not to make any final determinations until they had reviewed all of the evidence. In the immediate aftermath, news outlets began picking up the story. The local media covered the incident relentlessly, focusing on the explosive confrontation and the fact that Latoya, a teacher at James Madison High School, had been involved with 3 of her students in what was quickly becoming a public scandal. The allegations of an affair with multiple students spread like wildfire, and soon Latoya's personal life was exposed to the entire community. The media frenzy intensified, and public opinion turned harshly against her. Many questioned her judgment, her actions, and the ethics of her relationship with the boys. As the scandal grew, it became clear that Latoya's life would never be the same again. In the weeks that followed, the aftermath of the fight and the scandal began to unfold. Jamal, while recovering from his injuries, was now facing a different kind of challenge. The fight had not only harmed his body, but also threatened his reputation. As the news spread about his altercation with Rashad and the involvement of Latoya, questions arose about his character. The once promising athlete found himself under intense scrutiny. His future prospects in basketball, college scholarships, and his relationship with Latoya were all at risk. He became withdrawn, no longer attending school regularly, and the once confident young man was now grappling with guilt, confusion, and shame. Rashad and Andre faced severe consequences as well. Both were expelled from school for their roles in the altercation, and their futures seemed uncertain. Rashad, already known for his rebellious nature, now found himself on the wrong side of the law. The school board, responding to the pressure from concerned parents and the media, made the decision to expel both boys, removing them from the institution where they had once been stars. For Andre, who had hoped to attend college on an athletic scholarship, the expulsion was a crushing blow. He was now forced to face the consequences of his impulsive actions, which had cost him not only his place at the school, but also his future prospects. Latoya, meanwhile, was suspended from her teaching position at James Madison High School. The school board launched an internal investigation, and the pressure from the community and the media became overwhelming. Soon after, the school moved to revoke her teaching credentials. The once respected educator was now an outcast, her career destroyed. Her marriage to Marcus also fell apart. He had been blindsided by the scandal and, unable to bear the public shame and the emotional weight of the betrayal, filed for divorce. The foundation of her life had crumbled, and Latoya was left to pick up the pieces. Her phone rang endlessly with calls from the media, seeking comment and seeking answers. Reporters camped outside her home, and the online backlash was brutal. Latoya's life, once marked by respect and stability, had been reduced to a cautionary tale. The harsh public judgment was relentless, and she became a symbol of moral failure, her name associated with scandal and disgrace. Latoya's fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. Once a respected teacher, admired for her dedication and intelligence, she had now become a pariah. Her career was over, her marriage in ruins, and her public image was irreparably tarnished. She moved away from the town, hoping to escape the relentless attention and rebuild her life. But it wasn't easy. Latoya found herself isolated, cut off from the world she had once known. Her former colleagues at the school no longer spoke to her, and her friends, if she had any left, disappeared. The weight of her actions hung heavily over her every day. The guilt of her decisions, the lives she had hurt, and the relationships she had destroyed consumed her. She sought therapy in an attempt to understand what went wrong, but the damage to her psyche was profound. She had been living in a web of lies and deceit for so long that she no longer recognized the woman she had become. The affair with the boys had provided temporary excitement and escape, but the consequences were much more far-reaching than she could have ever imagined. Latoya's story became a tragic example of how one's choices, no matter how thrilling in the moment, can unravel a life, leaving behind only regret and pain. Despite attempts at personal growth and seeking redemption, the scars of her past remained with her, a constant reminder of her fall from grace. Oh, the new era of video creation with Hey Gen. Simply type your script to get started.